Right now, there's about $13 trillion sitting in passive index funds. And some of that money is yours. It's in your 401k, your IRA, your target date fund with the year 2055 slapped on the label. And for the last 40 years, you've been told the same story about it. That indexing is the safe choice, the boring choice, the thing responsible adults do with their money while the degenerates gamble on options. But here's the uncomfortable part. The very thing that made index funds safe is quietly being destroyed by their own success. And almost nobody holding them has any idea, because right now, the entire debate around investing is stuck on the same tired argument. Active versus passive. FEs versus performance. Whether your fund manager in his Patagonia vest can beat the S&P 500 after charging you 1% for the privilege. And look, that debate was settled years ago. He can't. But that's also the wrong fight entirely. Because while everyone's been arguing about which side of the boat to sit on, nobody's been asking the more important question. What happens to the boat itself when everybody piles onto the same side? That's the real story. And it's hiding in plain sight, inside the mechanics of how index funds actually work. But to understand what's happening, we need to back up all the way to 1976, because that's the year Jack Bogle launched the first index fund for regular investors at Vanguard. And Wall Street laughed at him. They literally called it Bogle's Folly. One competitor put out a poster asking who would ever settle for average returns. And for a while, they were right to laugh, because the fund raised only $11 million against a target of $150 million. But Bogle's idea was built on one simple observation. Most fund managers can't beat the market, and they charge you a fortune to try. So instead of paying someone to pick stocks, just buy every stock, pay almost nothing, and take whatever the market gives you. And here's the thing. The idea worked. It worked spectacularly. It's probably saved regular investors over $1 trillion in FEs. If you bought index funds over the past for decades, you did great. This is not a video telling you Jack Bogle was wrong. Bogle was right. But Bogle's idea had a hidden assumption baked into it. An assumption that was true in 1976, was still mostly true in 2006, and is breaking down right now in front of our eyes. The assumption was this: indexing only works if somebody else is doing the pricing. And to see why that matters, you need to understand what an index fund actually does when your paycheck hits it. Because a passive fund doesn't ask any questions. It doesn't read earnings reports. It doesn't care that a company's CEO just got indicted or that its margins are collapsing. It takes your money and buys every stock in the index, weighted by size. The bigger the company, the more of your money it gets. That's called market cap weighting. And it means an index fund is not really a neutral observer of the market. It's a machine with one rule. Whatever is already big, buy more of it. Now in a healthy market, that's fine. Because in a healthy market, passive funds are a small boat on a big ocean. The prices they're buying at are set by active investors, the people actually doing the homework, modeling cash flows, deciding what a company is worth. Passive investors were free riding on all that work. And free riding is a great deal, as long as someone else is still driving. But here's where the math gets uncomfortable. Because free riding only works when the free riders are the minority. And sometime around 2023, we crossed a line that had never been crossed in the history of financial markets. Passive funds now hold more as stocks than active funds do. Today, around 63% of all a stock fund assets are passive. That's more than $13 trillion running on autopilot. The passengers now outnumber the drivers. And every single month, the imbalance gets worse. Because every single month, billions of dollars of 401k contributions flow in on payday. No questions asked. So what does that actually do to prices? This is where it stops being a philosophical debate and starts being measurable. Two economists, Xavier Gabaix and Ralph Koijin, put out research on what they call the inelastic markets hypothesis. And their finding is the kind of thing that should be printed on a warning label. They estimated that $1 of passive flow into the stock market doesn't move prices by $1. It moves them by roughly 5. 5 to 1. Because the money is flowing into a market where fewer and fewer participants are willing to sell based on valuation, every new dollar has to bid harder to find shares. And now remember the one rule of the machine. Whatever is already big, buy more of it. Combine that rule with the 5 to 1 multiplier, and you get a feedback loop. A company gets big. The index gives it a bigger weight. Passive money buys more of it, which pushes the price up, which makes it bigger, which increases its weight, which attracts more passive money. Around and around. Size attracts money. Money creates size. At no point in that loop does anyone stop and ask whether the business is actually worth it, and you don't have to take my word for it, because you can see the loop's output every time you open your brokerage app. The Magnificent Seven now make up over 33% of the entire S&P 500. 7 companies. 1/3 of the index, which means when you buy the safe, diversified index fund, 33 cents of every dollar goes into 7 stocks. That is the most concentrated the US market has been in more than 50 years. And the last time it was even close, well, that's a story worth telling. Because this isn't the first time everyone decided the same handful of stocks couldn't lose. Go back to the early 1970s. To something called the Nifty 50. 50 big, beautiful American companies. Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Xerox, Polaroid. Wall Street called them one-decision stocks. You buy them once, you never sell. Price doesn't matter, quality wins forever. Institutions poured in. Valuations hit 60, 70 times earnings. And then, the 1973 bear market showed up, and the one-decision stocks made a second decision. Polaroid fell about 90%. Xerox fell over 70%. The companies were real. The products were real. The losses were also real. It took some of those investors a decade just to get back to even. But if the Nifty 50 shows what happens when everyone owns the same stocks, there's a better example of what happens when everyone runs the same strategy. October 19, 1987. Black Monday. The Dow fell 22.6% in a single day. Still the worst day in stock market history. And here's what most people never learned about it. There was no news that day. No war, no bank failure, no pandemic. The crash wasn't caused by an event. It was caused by a strategy. Something called portfolio insurance, a computerized system that automatically sold stocks as prices fell to limit losses. Brilliant for one investor, suicidal for everyone at once. Because when prices dipped, the machine sold. The selling pushed prices lower. Lower prices triggered more selling. Every fund's safety mechanism became the market's doom loop. The strategy that was supposed to protect everyone from a crash became the crash. Keep that sentence in your pocket. Because we're coming back to it. And if 1987 feels like ancient history, there's a fresher example of what forced, price-blind buying does to a market. Look at what happened to Tesla in December 2020. The month it was added to the S&P 500. The business didn't change that month. The cars didn't get better that month. But index funds were legally required to buy roughly $80 billion worth of Tesla stock by the close on December 18, simply because a committee decided it now belonged in the club. The stock ran more than 60% between the announcement and the inclusion date. Front-runners bought it first, knowing the index funds had no choice but to buy it from them higher. That's not investing. That's a toll booth. And every one of your 401k dollars paid the toll. Or flip it around and look at what happens to the companies left outside the club. Small caps, the Russell 2000, spent years underperforming, not because the businesses were worse, but because they sit outside the main river of passive flows. In an inelastic market, being unowned by the machine is a valuation death sentence, no matter what your cash flows look like. Which tells you something profound has changed. The most important factor determining a stock's price is no longer what the company earns. It's whether the machine is pointed at it. Now, a quick pause. Because everything we've covered so far comes down to one idea. Putting your money on autopilot and never looking under the hood can get expensive. And that's true for more than just index funds. Which brings us to the sponsor of today's video. And now, back to the $13 trillion machine running on autopilot. So here's where we actually are today. Passive is now the majority. The flows are automatic. The multiplier is 5 to 1. The top 7 stocks are a third of the index. And underneath all of it sits the most important buyer in the entire market. A buyer almost nobody talks about. Your payroll department. Because think about how the money actually moves. Every 2 weeks, tens of millions of Americans get paid. A slice of every paycheck goes into a 401k, lands in a target date fund, and gets shoveled into index funds within days. Nobody makes a decision. Nobody looks at a price. It is the single most reliable bid in the history of markets, roughly $500 billion a year of pure price-blind buying. And Wall Street knows it's there, which raises a question worth sitting with. If a stock market is supposed to be a mechanism for figuring out what companies are worth, what do you call a market where the marginal buyer doesn't care what anything is worth? And I think you can see where I'm going with this. Because a market held up by automatic buying has one very specific weakness. The buying is only automatic as long as the paychecks keep coming. And as long as the demographics cooperate. And the demographics have stopped cooperating. 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every single day. And boomers hold the largest share of U.S. equities of any generation. For 40 years, they were the ones putting money in. Now, they're beginning the slow process of taking it out, because retirees don't contribute to 401ks. They sell them, slowly, mechanically, and just as price blind on the way out as they were on the way in. So the machine that only knows how to buy is about to meet a generation that structurally needs to sell. And when that happens, the 5 to 1 multiplier is still there. It just works in reverse, which brings us to the part of this that actually keeps professionals up at night. The exit door problem. Because here's the dirty secret of the index fund structure. Its greatest strength, and its greatest weakness, is that it never holds cash. It's fully invested, all the time, by design. When you click sell on your index fund, the fund doesn't hand you cash from a drawer. It sells stocks immediately, whatever the price is. And if enough people click sell at the same time, there's no analyst on the other side saying, hold on, Microsoft at this price is a bargain, I'll take the other side. Because we spent 2 decades converting those analysts into passive holders. The active investors who used to be the market's shock absorbers, the ones who step in and buy when things get cheap, they're a shrinking minority. We took the shock absorbers out of the car because the road had been smooth for 40 years, and that's the sentence from 1987 coming out of your pocket. The strategy that was supposed to protect everyone becomes the crash. Portfolio insurance was a doom loop running on a few $100 billion. The passive feedback loop is the same wiring, running through $13 trillion, wired directly into the retirement accounts of an entire country. Now, if all this sounds like some fringe theory, it's worth knowing who else has said it. Michael Burry, the guy who called the subprime crisis, has been comparing index funds to the CDOs of 2008 since 2019. His argument was simple. Just like subprime, the danger isn't in the asset. It's in the flows, in the sheer amount of money flowing through a structure that everyone assumes is liquid, until the day everyone tries to use the exit at once. He said, the theater keeps getting more crowded, but the exit door is the same size it always was. And even the academics who defend passive investing concede the core point. Nobody knows where the line is. Nobody knows at what percentage passive ownership breaks price discovery entirely, because we have never run this experiment before. We are the experiment. And there's one more layer that makes this cycle different from the Nifty 50 or 1987. The illusion of diversification. Because on paper, you own 500 companies. In reality, a third of your money is in 7 stocks. And those 7 stocks are all making the same bet. Microsoft, Nvidia, Meta, Alphabet, Amazon. They are all in an arms race spending hundreds of billions of dollars on the same artificial intelligence build-out, which means the diversified index fund, the boring choice, the adult choice, has quietly become a leveraged bet on a single technology working out. You didn't choose that bet. The feedback loop chose it for you. Size attracted money. Money created size. And now, the retirement savings of an entire generation are concentrated in one trade, chosen by no one, approved by no one, and understood by almost no one holding it. And early results are already showing up, if you know where to look. Stocks now move more on index inclusion than on earnings. Companies added to the S&P 500 jump before a single analyst updates a model, purely because the machine is forced to buy them. Correlations inside the index keep rising. Stocks increasingly move together, up and down, like they're chained at the ankle. Because they are. The chain is the index itself. And every few years we get a preview of the reverse gear. August 2024, when the yen carry trade unwound and the Nikkei dropped 12% in a day on essentially no news. The flash crashes that appear and vanish in minutes. Small tremors from the same fault line. Oh no, this is not a video telling you to sell your index funds tomorrow. The loop can keep spinning for years. The paycheck bid is still enormous. And shorting a doom loop while it's still looping is how people go broke being early. But bubble or no bubble was never the right question. The right question is the one nobody's asking. What happens to a market when nobody's left doing the pricing? Because for 40 years, indexing worked by quietly borrowing the intelligence of active investors. And we are now finding out, in real time, with your retirement account as the test subject, what happens when the thing you're borrowing runs out. If you want to keep watching that experiment unfold, while traditional financial media keeps telling you everything is fine, hit subscribe. Because this channel covers the quiet mechanics underneath the market, and this particular machine is just getting warmed up. Because here's the truth. You can automate the buying. You can automate the selling. You can put an entire country's savings on autopilot and call it diversification. But you cannot automate price discovery. Somebody, somewhere, has to decide what things are actually worth. And the fewer people doing that job, the more violent the correction when reality finally applies for the position. The index was never magic. It was a mirror. And a mirror only works if someone's still standing in front of it.